But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we read in Genesis chapter 6. According to the careful details recorded in chapter 5 of Genesis, there were 1656 years and 10 generations between the creation of Adam and the death of Methuselah, the death of Lamech, and the day that Noah entered the ark at the age of 600 years. In this period of time we see now that the world population increased greatly, and wickedness increased greatly. We should note that when Cain sinned, he was exiled. There was no death penalty imposed for his sin, even though he had murdered his brother. The death penalty was introduced after the flood, and so there appears to have been little restraint on the wickedness of men. But also, as we read this chapter, we see that there was rebellion apparently in the spiritual realm as well, which increased the wickedness on the earth even more. Let's read together Genesis 6, verses 1 to 8. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man for ever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And may the Lord bless his word to us. We have a clear description of great wickedness in the earth, which is why God brought the flood, to cleanse the world of the wickedness, as every intent of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. But we have some other strange things recorded here. We have reference to the fact that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. Who were these sons of God and these daughters of men, whose offspring were the mighty men of old? First of all, we need to note that as Moses recorded this, he's using ancient terminology. We need to look for other references to that. Sons of God in the ancient writings. And a very clear one is in the first few chapters of the book of Job, where we're told the sons of God came before the throne of God. These are evidently the angels. There are good angels and bad angels in this assembly before the throne of God. And Satan accuses Job before God. So in that context, the sons of God referred to angelic beings. We know from other scriptures that angelic beings can and do from time to time take the form of men. When Jesus rose from the dead, 2 angels rolled back the stone and sat on it. The women saw 2 young men. And when Jesus ascended, 2 angels spoke to them. The disciples saw 2 men clothed in white. It's fascinating to me that we have a whole genre of Greek legends talking about the gods coming down among men. And it seemed to me that those legends reflect the kind of things that's happening here. For these beings that were produced were described as giants. They were from the offspring of the sons of God coming to the daughters of men. They were the mighty men who were of old men of renown, men of extraordinary power. There is some support for this interpretation in the New Testament. Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4, says, "But if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly." So he speaks about angels who sinned, who are bound for future judgment, and their sin is followed by the great flood in the time of Noah. And a few verses later he says, "Whereas angels who are greater in power and might," comparing them to men. Jude also makes reference to these, saying in verse 6, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." There's no other obvious explanation of these angels sinning that have now been bound, other than that these are the sons of God who came to the daughters of men in the days before the flood. Whether or not there's any other suitable explanation of those verses, the whole direction of society in the days before the flood was self-centeredness, expressed in those words, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. What is this 120 years? It seems God made this declaration 120 years before the flood. So Noah, the preacher of righteousness, declared God's judgment for 120 years until the flood came. We also see that this was a period of great striving. God striving with men. God trying to turn men back from their unreasonable, selfish, self-centered, violent, wicked desires to a more reasonable, sensible, loving, caring society. Remember that these men, having newly descended from Adam, were much smarter and intelligent and healthier and stronger. Their lives were hundreds of years longer than ours. Their achievements during life much greater than ours. Their knowledge and skill and understanding much greater than ours. But they were not using it wisely. They were not using it for good. They were using it for evil. The direction of society was described back in chapter 4 with the descendants of Cain, being taken up with business, farming, with music and entertainment, with metalwork and crafts, but little time for God. Summed up with the words, every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, and God was sorry. There was no law system, so the pattern of behaviour was as expressed by Lamech, as he said to his wives, I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. No principle of an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, as proclaimed by Moses later. Rather, an abuse of power by those in power. God was very sorry. He'd created man to have fellowship with him. He'd created the angels to facilitate that. But all was in rebellion. There was no fellowship. There was no joy. There was no peace. Just violence. And so the Lord gives man notice, 120 years, during which time Noah proclaimed God's wrath upon them. He would destroy man and beast. But there was one man who was listening to God, and that is Noah. We're told, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So Noah was told what he would have to do to be saved from the flood that was coming.